It's been a minute since I've actually posted a video. I actually filmed my July reading wrap up and just never got it posted. And then I did not film one for August. And here we are, and September has passed. And now I have a big giant reading wrap up, which is nice because I haven't been reading as much this year because of, and also because of TikTok. TikTok has melted my little nog and has made it harder for me to read. What happened? A couple things. One, maybe most excitingly, this right here. My book came out. My book came out September 12th. This is my debut novel. It's a spooky little horror novel. It's gorgeous. If you'd like to read it, you can purchase it. I will probably link it below. Also, my second book had developmental edits to go through, which developmental edits are the hardest part of the process for me. I've talked about this multiple times. It is where you do like the major restructuring of the book to make it function as a cohesive story. And it is always really difficult for me because, I don't know, maybe I just write hot messes of first drafts. I'm not sure, but it's always really difficult. And so having those two things back to back in September was a lot for me to handle, and that was what I was working on in all of August and all of September, and so like things didn't get edited, things didn't get posted. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about everything I read in July, August, and September. We're calling this my big giant summer reading wrap up, even though it's not going to include June because we already talked about June. Instead of going in chronological order, which is what I normally do, this time I'm going to walk you through the books I'm reading based on category. So I'll have them time stamped below. Fantasy. We're just going to knock these two out of the way. I'm not going to talk about them very much, but I did read the next two books. If you've been following along, I am reading the Game of Thrones series slowly. I'm mostly doing the audiobook, so it's like a very slow process because each of the audiobooks are like 30 to 40 hours long. But I knocked out books 3 and 4, 3 and 4. I read A Clash of Kings, and then I read A Storm of Swords. My computer is over here with all of my books. Both of these books were excellent. I think A Storm of Swords has been by far my favorite book in the series. It is so good. So much happens in it. And I'm on the 4th book right now, and I'm kind of dragging myself through it a little bit. We are not following my favorite characters in this book. We're following a lot of characters I care significantly less about, and so it's been a little bit of a chore to get through the 4th book. But I'm really enjoying the series. I'm excited to finish it up so I can go and watch the TV show, and then be ready for House of Dragons, obviously, when that comes back. Next up, I read Witches at the End of the World by Chelsea Iversen. I have a copy. I should have grabbed it. But this book actually doesn't come out until October 17th, but I read it early because Chelsea is actually one of my good friends, and she was with me. We were in conversation for my book launch back when my book came out. So I wanted to make sure I had her book read ahead of time, obviously. And we've been talking. We have a very, 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 very like strangely similar publishing story. Both of us got picked up from Twitter, like the same pitch contest. One of my editors is Chelsea's editors, and we both live like fairly close to each other in Colorado. And so it was very exciting. We've met like many times for like coffee and to chat, and it was really exciting to read her book. But let me actually tell you about her book. It is a historical fantasy novel that follows these two sisters. They're both witches, and they're living in, I believe it is 14th century Norway, and there's these witch trials that have been going on for a while now. Their mother was actually killed in a witch trial, and their grandmother took them out into like the wilderness, and that's where they have been living since for like years now. Now their grandmother has passed away. They're both adults, and one of the sisters decides that she is going to go live back in town. She's decided she's like done with living in the wilderness. She's going to move back into town, and she thinks that her other sister will follow along. And she doesn't, so they choose these very different paths. The book is really about like what that does to their relationship, the viciousness, I think, almost that happens between sisters, and the love that's between sisters. It is very much a sister story. Like if you enjoy reading about sisters, I think you'll really enjoy this. It is like deeply atmospheric. It is a little bit on the slower side in terms of it is not like a super fast-paced action-y fantasy, but I think it's like really beautiful. I think it's like the perfect read for like November, like kind of like a desolate end of fall, beginning of winter, all the leaves are gone off the trees vibe. So good. Also, the cover is like stunning and gorgeous. I'm obsessed with it. Next up, in a completely different corner of the fantasy genre, I read 6 Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is a novella that falls between the 2 first books in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, which is a vampire fantasy romance series. And this book follows Lilith in Vale. So Lilith is this young woman. She's a human woman living in this village that's all human, and this like horrible plague has taken over her village, and essentially it makes people like start to like dry out and like crumble like a withering rose. Okay, But she's a scientist. She's a girl in STEM. Move over, Allie Hazelwood. We'll talk about Allie later. And she is like, I have an idea. I know what I can do to fix this. She knows there's a vampire in town. There's just one vampire guy. He used to be a general in like the vampire armies. But he kind of just lives on the outskirts of town. And everyone's like, don't talk to the evil vampire man. But she's like, I think his blood might be the cure for this mysterious illness. So she goes to the vampire man and she's like, hey, vampire man, can I have like a drop of your blood or a little bit of your blood? Every month I'll bring you a rose in exchange. And they work out this bargain where she comes and visits him once a month and gets blood from him. And then in exchange, she gives him a rose. And it's like a magical rose. Obviously, it's very like Beauty and the Beast score. It was really good. I wish I would have actually read it when I was supposed to. It falls in between the first and second book, but I've finished the first and second book and I didn't know this existed. And so I read it afterwards. But Lilith and Vale show up in the second book of the Crowns from Nyaxia series, and it would have been lovely to know like their origins. But it is really good. It was like pretty fast paced. I think it's like 150 pages maybe. Just like a good little story. And next up, we have Miss Jennifer L. Armentrout. We'll be talking about her more than once. This is the positive mention, so get ready for a negative mention. I read A Light in the Flame by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book in her spin-off series from Blood and Ash, A Shadow in the Ember. And it's following Sarah and Niketos. I don't want to get too much into the plot because it is a second book in a series, so like I don't want to spoil things. But it's essentially like a Hades and Persephone retelling. It gives very much like Disney Hercules vibes to me, but like make it dark fantasy romance, you know? I actually really enjoyed this book a lot more than I enjoyed the first book in the series. I struggle a lot of times with Hades and Persephone retellings, that the worlds feel very empty because like obviously Hades and like the underworld is like a pretty like desolate place, and sometimes I'm like, okay, there's like wandering around empty castles for a good chunk of this, and I felt that a little bit empty castle syndrome in the first book. I didn't feel that at all in this book. We get a lot more world building in like the land of the gods, where Niketos is from. A lot of the other gods are involved. We learn a lot more stuff. I really enjoyed this one. I really like how the romance between Sarah and Niketos develops in the second book. Overall, a good time. I read A Soul of Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which is the next book in the From Blood and Ash series. This book I originally wasn't going to read because it is a book, it is from Blood and Ash, but in Castiel's perspective. And I just like typically don't love a book from the boy's perspective. Like I don't need a second book from the man's perspective. I just don't. That's not something I need or want in my life. The big exception being, of course, Midnight Sun by Edward Cullen. I mean... Stephanie Meyer did write it, but it was from Eddie C's head. That was fun and fresh because Eddie is a little cuckoo bananas, and also he can read minds, so you got like a lot of insight into the world. And it also had been like a long time. We weren't like waiting for the series to be completed. This book I wouldn't have read because I know this is not the type of book for me. But the way Jennifer L. Armentrout sets it up is it's taking place in the present, and Castile is like telling Penelope is telling Poppy the story of like how they met. Okay, and so there are chapters that are taking place in the present, and then there are chapters, but most of the book, the bulk of the book, the vast majority of the book is his perspective on what happened in From Blood and Ash. Okay, I want to let you know that I love From Blood and Ash. Okay, I'm speaking to you as someone who loves this book. This was my sister's birthday present to me this year. She gave me this gorgeous sprayed-edged copy that has like the leaves from the Blood Forest and like the dagger sprayed on it. Gorgeous. Absolutely love it. I've read From Blood and Ash, this book, probably at least like 4 or 5 times. Like I love it so much. It's not that I like dislike the story, but hearing it from Castile's perspective added absolutely nothing. It like took out any of the tension because Castile knows what's happening the whole time in the first book. Like he knows what's going on because he's plotting and scheming, and like a lot of it was like quite boring. It was quite boring, and I knew it wasn't going to be for me. This is the worst part, is I knew it wasn't going to be for me, but I was forced into reading it because there are like a few chapters, I would say probably like 2 to 3 chapters in the whole book that take place in the present that are super relevant. There's a lot of chapters in the present where they're just like putzing around and like it doesn't matter, but there are probably like the last chapter seems crucial. We got some crucial information in the last chapter that like you could not have missed. Could you just read the last chapter of this book? Absolutely. I really didn't like it. I felt like it was super boring. And honestly, if you were thinking about reading it and you're not someone who is a big fan, because I know some people are like a really big fan of getting it from the guy's perspective, if you're not a big fan of that, I would say just like read the last chapter and you're probably good to go. Sorry, I like normally am not super mean in these, but I like truly felt like offended. I felt like personally affronted by what Jennifer made me go through in reading that book because it was a bad time. I had a bad time reading that. And I don't want to ruin this because I love these books. I don't recommend them a lot because they are a little cuckoo bananas, especially in the later books, and they go off the walls, and I don't think they're for everyone, but they're for me, and I'm going to keep reading the series. Obviously, I love them, but yeah, I didn't need that book. That book was unnecessary. I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This book, if you haven't seen it, has been like literally everywhere. It is like the biggest book of the moment. I like don't understand the marketing. Like the marketing that went into this, the marketing team, they're just on it. They are on top of it, because I don't know if I've ever seen such like quick dispersion of a book so fully into like everyone. Like everyone was reading this like immediately after it came out. I finally got my hands on it. I was getting it from the library, so the wait list was quite long, but I finally got it and I read it in like 24 hours. It was good. I enjoyed it. I think it's a great beginner fantasy romance. There's not a ton of world building. We jump pretty quickly into the story, and the world is like similar enough to like the human world that you like don't need a ton of like background information. And she chooses to like set things, and like we're using the same months that we use. Like there's October and November, and like they have the same days of the week. And she doesn't like lean into world building as hard as other people do, which I think is a choice that makes it like really accessible. It feels very much like 2008 YA fiction. Like the beginning, I could not believe how much the beginning felt like Divergent, the book. And then as we go on, we get like Twilight moments, and we get like Hunger Games moments even. Like it feels very like 2008 fiction, and I was a 2008 YA fiction girly, so like no complaints from me. I thought it was really enjoyable. It is not my like favorite fantasy romance ever, but I like certainly will be reading Iron Flame when it comes out. Like I thought it was really good, and I was actually surprised by how much I really enjoyed the dragon element. I is not someone who would like typically consider myself like a dragon girl. I do not seek out like dragon fiction. But I loved the dragons in this, which I guess makes sense because my favorite character in Throne of Glass is Abraxas, the wyvern. So maybe I shouldn't be shocked, but essentially, I don't tell you the plot of this book. Follows Violet, I think she's like 20 years old, and she's been training her whole life to be like a scribe, so like an academic essentially, but very last minute her mother, who was like the principal of the dragon school, is like, you have to become a dragon writer, which is obviously like a very physical thing, and she has like a chronic illness, disability that causes her to like get injured quite frequently. I think the authors come out and said it's like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and she's also like quite small. She's like a very small petite girl, which also like the dragons are very large, so like it's more helpful if you're also quite large. It's about using her other strengths to overcome those physical disadvantages that she has. Also there's a love triangle. Obviously it's fantasy romance. The love triangle wasn't my favorite part, just because we have, obviously, and as love triangles are, we have two love interests. We have Xaden and Dane. Dane is the most insufferable human being. I was like, can Dane stop? Like, he's so annoying. Like, it was not really set up well as a love triangle. It wasn't supposed to be, I don't think Dane was supposed to be like a comparable love interest, but he did drive me cuckoo bananas. Like, he was annoying. Dane, go home. And then last, but certainly not least, I read a piece of Hermione fanfiction. I have just sometimes, especially while I was editing, like only Hermione would hit the spot. And I started a couple. I got like halfway into a couple Hermione fanfictions and abandoned them because they have to be like top tier before I'm going to finish them. This one was good, and it was also a little bit shorter, which I think helped it. I think sometimes, like if it's going to be like a 500k piece of fanfiction, it better be like impeccable. You know, and this one was a little bit shorter. I feel like it took me like 4 hours to, like, I feel like it was like normal novel length. And it was called Wait and Hope by Might Be Writing. So it's Draco and Hermione, and they are married. They're like both full grown adults. They're married, and Hermione has this accident where she like loses her memories for the past, I believe it's 7 years, and that's all the time they've been together. So that's the time they've been married, the time that they were dating, like everything they've been together. And so Hermione is like quite confused why she is now married to Draco Malfoy, who like in school was like obviously like a bully and like a mean kid, and now they're married to each other. And it is so cute because essentially Draco has to like make Hermione fall in love with him again. Oh, it was so sweet and cute. I absolutely loved it. It's like The Vow, with that movie with Rachel McAdams, but like I think probably significantly better and like cuter and sweeter and also magical. I loved it. It was a really cute little treat. Switching gears onto my thriller and horrors. I kind of like mixed them together because I didn't really have enough for their own categories. So let's start. So another one that I read because I had an author event, I feel they're quite fancy, well, these author events, is I read Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. This is a slasher, which is actually a genre I really adore. It is a genre I have come to find that I really like in the past, like probably like 5-ish years. It is something that I like in a TV show. There's been a couple slasher TV shows that I've really enjoyed watching. I'm not someone who does a lot of horror movies, and I definitely don't do them in the theater. I need to be able to pause them frequently because I get really stressed out and I like need a minute to compose myself. So I can't go see them in the theater. I need to see them by like in a space where the people I'm watching them with or myself can pause them and like take a breather. And also I want to watch them in the light of day. But anyway, I like a slasher and I like kind of that trope in a book as well. This one does get a little bit gory. So do be aware of that. It follows Krista. Krista is on vacation with her boyfriend and they're taking this like trip to the Rocky Mountains. They're like staying with like a group trip to the Rocky Mountains, like a tour group. They're staying in this like lodge in the Rocky Mountains and I don't remember what they're doing. They don't get there, so we never really learn. Because on their way up to this lodge that they're supposed to be staying at, the bus can't pass the road. There's like snow and this tree is falling over and there's like a snowstorm, and so this bus like can't get past the road. So they all unload out of the bus and then people start disappearing. They like find this little cabin up there that they're able to like kind of camp out in, but slowly one by one people from this cabin start disappearing, and then bodies start showing up, which, you know, bad news bears when bodies are appearing. Yeah, she like is trying to figure out how to get out of there alive. And also like, why is this person like targeting them? It was very good. It was very fast paced. Like, read it in a day, and I loved the snowy setting. It was like such a fun, like it'll be such a good winter book. And I got to interview Darcy. We did a like virtual event. She lives in New Zealand, so we did not meet in person, but we got to do a virtual event together where I got to talk to her about this book, which was so much fun. It reminded me a little bit of One by One by Ruth Ware, just kind of that like snowy setting as slowly people are dying, but it's definitely a little bit gorier than that. And also, this was like an exact like matchup. There was a show, I just had to Google it to make sure like I knew what I was talking about. It was called Slasher. It was on Netflix. But the second season takes place at this like summer camp, but they're up there in the winter, and then there's the slasher like killing them all, and it like has exactly the same vibes as that. So if you also watched the show that came out in like 2016 called Slasher on Netflix, and you watch the second season that takes place in the snow, it's just like that show. Then I read a little, I think it's classified as horror novel called Comfort Me with Apples by Cathryn M. Valente. This book was such a weird little treat. I really, really enjoyed it. It is super short. I think it took me like maybe an hour to read. I think it's like 100 pages, tiny. I like didn't realize how tiny it was. And it's super weird. It's a super weird book. It's about this woman named Sophia. She lives in this like very controlled community. It's like very perfect. Her husband is very perfect. Her life is very perfect. But we start to learn about all these rules in the community, and they are weird. We know something weird is going on pretty quickly, and everyone's acting like it is totally normal, but like we as the reader are like, no, that is not a normal rule. Slowly we're kind of trying to like figure out what happened. The like big reveal twist, I think this is one of those books. I feel like this is a rare occurrence, but I think this is one of those books where like the reveal twist makes it. And if the reveal, the like reason behind what's going on in this community doesn't work for you, it's not something you enjoy, you will hate the whole book. And if it does work for you, you will really enjoy the whole book. I really liked the reveal. I thought it was really interesting. It was something that I was not expecting, but also like made a lot of sense and was such a like thought-provoking little twisteroo. So I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it because it is so short that even if you don't like it, like you've lost an hour of time. But I thought it was great. It reminded me a little bit like the beginning, not the reveal part. The reveal I think is quite different, but the beginning reminded me a lot of that movie with Harry Styles. I can't remember what it's called, but that Harry Styles and Florence Pugh and Olivia Wilde and like Chris Pine, like all those people were in, and were like Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine. That drama was everything to me. I miss those days, but it reminds me a little bit of like the premise of that movie. Although I do think the reveal is quite different. Then I read The Writing Retreat by Andrea Bartz. I like to describe this one as like a Scooby-Doo style thriller. And by that, I mean, it's like not like a super realistic domestic type thriller. It's like the villain is giving a monologue at the end to like explain why he did it. Like we're up to hijinks. There's like secret passageways. The like painting's eyes watch you. I don't know if that's something that happens, but like it very well could. Like it feels a little bit silly. I think the biggest critiques I've seen of this book is that it does feel a little outlandish, but I really enjoyed that in a thriller. I thought it was like fun and fast paced. So we're following this young writer named Alex. I think she recently turned 30 actually, and she gets invited to go on this writing retreat with her absolute favorite author. And her favorite author has this like big Victorian mansion in, I believe it's upstate New York, kind of in a rural area. And she's there even though her ex-best friend Ren also got invited on this writing retreat. So like there's already some tensions going into the writing retreat, and then once we get there, they like pretty quickly get snowed in, so they can't get in and out of this house, and then things start going quite strange. Things start going weird, and they're trapped up there and it's getting spooky. I loved it. I thought it was so fun, but like I said, it is a little outlandish. If you want something that's a little bit more of a serious thriller, I don't think this would be the one for you. Then I read Yellowface by RF Kuang. This is very different than I think everything else that RF Kuang has written. I've actually read Babel by her and then Yellowface. I am excited to read the Poppy Wars, but I want to get through Game of Thrones first. We want to get through, like, you know, one epic series before we start another. But that is next up on the list. Yellowface is a satire about the publishing industry. It is about this woman named June Hayward, and she is like a mid-list author. So she's like selling, you know, maybe a couple thousand books a year. She's not making enough to like do this full time. She's also doing like SAT tutoring, and it is about her and her friend. They went to school together, and her friend became like a breakout bestseller. Her name's Athena Liu. And so these girls are hanging out together. They decide to have a pancake eating contest. This all happens like quite early. I'm not spoiling anything. They decide to have a pancake eating contest, and Athena Liu chokes and dies. Which, like, what a silly thing. What a silly way to go. But she chokes and dies, and June is in her house, and she decides to steal the manuscript that Athena just finished. It is like still like super rough. It's not like ready to be published, but she decides she's going to polish this manuscript up and sell it as her own. And it's kind of about everything that happens from there. It is about kind of like her spiral about like getting caught, the people around her being like, did she write this? Did she not write it? And it also deals a lot with like race in the publishing industry and like who is entitled to tell whose stories. Athena is a writer of like Chinese descent. I think she might even be like from China. I think she might like have been born there. I'm not exactly sure. I don't quite remember. But regardless, she like is of Asian descent, and June is a white woman, and it is about the novel that June decides to publish is about the use and exploitation of Chinese laborers in World War II, I think. I don't know. And so there's a lot of conversation about like who is entitled to tell whose stories, and also like the publishing industry, and they're like the way they're working towards diversity and the ways in which this is like sometimes good and sometimes also just something they do for like show. Rebecca RF Kuang's authored, she talks about how this is like a a novel about kind of the horrors of this industry that is like so incredibly isolating and makes people feel like very alone. It's like competitive and isolating. And I think this book does such a gorgeous job of portraying some of like the darker aspects of the publishing industry. I read this book, I finished it like 3 days before my book came out, and a lot of it like really rang true to me about just kind of like the feelings and emotions and kind of that come along with the process of being involved in the publishing industry. And I thought it was really interesting and well done. It is definitely like a lot lighter and a lot sillier almost. Silly maybe isn't the correct word because I think it deals with some heavy topics, but it's definitely a lot lighter than like Babel by RF Kuang. I was talking to my sister about it, and I was like, if Babel made you want to like sit down and have like coffee with Rebecca in like a coffee shop and like have a serious academic conversation about like language and translation and colonialism, this is the kind of book you want to have a conversation about while you're sitting on like the living room floor drinking a bottle of like Screw Top Rosé or maybe some like margaritas. Like they're just very different books and they have very different styles and vibes, and I thought they were both great. This one is like very different than her other books, but I think it still had like some really thoughtful and thought-provoking points, even though the format was a little bit it's satire, so it's a little bit like funnier, lighter in terms of format. And then my last thrillery type book was I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I've been wanting to read this for like years. I read 5 Survive by Holly Jackson earlier this year, I believe, and I was excited to read Good Girl's Guide for Murder. Unfortunately, it was not totally it for me. I think it was a good book. I enjoyed it. I won't be continuing in this series. I think it's just a little too YA for me. I find the YA books I love are like few and far between and becoming fewer and far between. It also was a little bit more of a mystery than a thriller, and I find mysteries are one of the hardest genre for me to like truly fall in love with. It's just not a genre that I like super vibe with unless it's like the perfect book. I think it's an incredibly well done mystery with some thriller elements because Miss Pip does put herself in some precarious situations. The story is about Pip, this like high school senior who for her senior projects decides she's going to investigate this murder that happened in her town where a girl went missing and her boyfriend was accused of the crime, and then pretty immediately after that he killed himself, and she's investigating it, and she kind of recruits the man who was accused his brother to help her investigate kind of things that are going on. And there's like a lot of stuff that happens. She uncovers like a lot of dark sides to this town. I think it is very, very well done. It just like wasn't totally my vibe. last but certainly not least, we're going to go through all the romances I've read over the past few months. First up is the book that I would say is the least romance book of all of these books, and that is The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. Like, it has some romance elements. We're like following a lot of like romantic relationships, but it's also like not at all a typical romance structure. It follows these 3 different women. We're following these 3 women. We have Siobhan, Jane, and Miranda, close. Siobhan, Miranda, and Jane, and they all get stood up on Valentine's Day. That's how we open, is all 3 of them get stood up on Valentine's Day, and they all live very different lives, and they're looking for very different things in their like romantic lives. So you have Siobhan is this like life coach person. She's like the Rachel Hollis of this world, essentially, and she is really like looking for a fling, you know, looking for something quick, easy, a nice time. Then we have Miranda. I think I might be mixing these up. Miranda, who is a tree like a lumberjack. She's a lumberjane. She like climbs into trees and cuts them down, which is super cool. And she has a boyfriend, but like things are not like excellent with her boyfriend. He's like an okay boyfriend, but not a great boyfriend. And she's kind of like grappling with that. Like, does she want to settle in this relationship, or does she want to like try to go for more? Especially since he stood her up on Valentine's Day. Rude. That's how we're starting this relationship. So. And then we have this last woman who is working like in a charity shop. We know something really traumatic happened to her, and she like fled her place she was last living, and she's kind of moved out here and is now becomes like friends with this customer that comes in all the time, and kind of starts to develop a crush on him, which is super cute. And she's like trying to decide if she's ready to pursue a romantic relationship. So they're all in these very different places in their lives, and we're following them, all 3 of them, as they kind of grapple with that. And then of course their stories interconnect in places. I won't obviously spoil how they interconnect, but they are interconnected, and it's fun. I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I loved this so much more than I expected. I've been seeing this book everywhere since it came out, and it's been on my TBR, but I was like, okay, I don't know. I thought it was going to be like mid, but I loved it. I thought it was so good. It gives like Hallmark Halloween movie. This book like very explicitly takes place in like late spring, early summer, but it feels like a Halloween movie. It gives small town Gilmore Girls type fall vibes. Sorry, Ashley Poston. You said it in the wrong season. Also had a ghost in it. That's okay. It's great, even though it takes place in the summer. Following Florence, which is also the name of my monstera. So Florence and Florence. We're following Florence, who is this ghostwriter for this like prolific romance writer, and she has kind of decided that she doesn't really want to write romance anymore. And so she's trying to worm her way out of writing the last manuscript in her contract, which is obviously a romance book, and she's trying to figure out if she can write like a romance adjacent book at least. And so she's like very, very behind on her deadline. And then her father dies, and so she has to return to her hometown. She hasn't been back to her hometown since she moved out when she was like 18, because she can talk to ghosts, and this is something she got like relentlessly bullied for when she was in school. Her family owns the town's mortuary, and she has been able to talk to ghosts since she was little, and she like solved this crime when she was like 12 by talking to a ghost. And so like growing up, she got like bullied a lot because she could talk to ghosts. Okay, and so she hasn't been back to this town since, but obviously she's back in town for her father's funeral and to help her family kind of like take care of everything after his death. So she's like dealing with this loss and like being back in this small town community for the first time in a long time. And then this ghost shows up, and the ghost happens to be her editor, like the editor that she's supposed to turn the manuscript into. And she is trying to help him like cross over to the other side. And normally when a ghost needs to cross over, they have unfinished business, and she suspects it's this manuscript. So she needs to get this manuscript finished so she can cross over to the other side. And there's also a romance. There's a romance plot. It's so good. It is such a delicious little book. Like I said, it feels like a Hallmark Halloween movie in the best ways. I would say this is the rom-com for the girlies who loved Halloween Town. I would say this is the cozier and like softer of our 2 like slightly spooky rom-coms, because I'm going to be talking about another one later. I read Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, as I've mentioned more than once, and I'm happy to tell you, I am a reformed Ali Hazelwood. Hater seems way too strong of a word. Denier, I think. I read The Love Hypothesis, and I was like, I don't know. I don't get it. Then I read Love on the Brain, and I was like, the girls who get it, and the girls who don't. And I feel the same about this. I don't know if there's another romance writer in the space who writes as joyfully as Ali Hazelwood. Ali Hazelwood's books just fill me with so much joy. The Love Theoretically, we're following Elsie, who is a recent like PhD grad She's recently graduated from her PhD program and is like looking for a like professor spot. They're really hard to come by, and so she's been working as like an adjunct professor, and it doesn't pay a lot. So she's been working at a bunch of different schools. Her schedule is crazy, and she's still not getting paid well. And so to kind of supplement her income, she's been working for this app where she like essentially fake dates people. And she just goes on like one date with them. It's just like essentially so they have someone to go with them to these events. And she is fake dating this one guy, and she's gone with him to a couple events, which is against like the policy of the app, but she's done it anyway because he's a really nice guy. Anyway, no big deal, right? Until she shows up at this interview. It's for a like full-time professor position in the physics department at MIT. So like really big deal. She shows up, and on the board of people that are interviewing her is the brother of the man she's in fake dating, which is a big problem because in these fake dates, she lies about what she does because she doesn't want them to be able to track her down. So she says she's a children's librarian. So she shows up for this like big deal position, and this guy is already like, what? You said you were a children's librarian. And she's like, So she's dealing with that. And then also, she is a theoretical physicist, and he is an experimental physicist. And we learn in this book that experimental physicists and theoretical physicists don't always get along. There's a lot of tension in the physics community between these two groups of physicists. And he is like the biggest, baddest of the experimental physicists, and like started all of the hatred towards the theoretical physicists. And so there's like a lot of tension there. And then obviously they fall in love. It's so good. It's so delightful. Love on the Brain is still probably my top Ali Hazelwood book, but this is like so close behind it. So close. Such a delight. Okay, my next spooky little rom-com, I told you there was another one coming, is The Ex Hex by Erin Sterlin. This book is about Vivian and Reese, and they are both witches. Vivian is like a small town witch. She's grown up in this, I don't know, it's like a small southern town. They have a college there. They have like tourists that come through for like their fall festival. And Reese is part of a like very prestigious line of witches that live in Wales. So they have very different like witchy lives. And we meet them initially when they're like 19. They have this like whirlwind summer. Reese is in town taking some like classes at the college because it's a witch college sometimes. It's like half witch college, half regular college. He's taking some witchy classes in town. They have like a whirlwind summer romance that ends quite promptly when Reese tells Vivian that he actually is betrothed to someone who lives back in Wales. He's like, I actually gotta go because I gotta deal with this lady I'm betrothed to. And she's like, whoa, 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 you didn't tell me you were betrothed. And she gets really mad, and so once he leaves, she's like heartbroken, and she decides to curse him. And they kind of think it's just like a silly little goofy curse that didn't actually work until Reese shows back up 10 years in the future and is back to like charge the ley lines, which is very, very like Raven Boys core. If you've read the Raven Boys, there's a lot of talk about ley lines. Anyway, he's back to charge the ley lines because his family is like deeply connected to like the history of this town. Anyway, and it turns out he's cursed, like for realsies. And it like, because he's cursed when he goes to charge the ley lines, it also curses the ley lines. Ugh. Bad news. And so they decide they need to fix this. They need to work together to fix whatever happened to the ley lines and whatever happened to Reese and like undo the curse. And then in doing so, they realize they still have feelings for each other from a decade earlier. And it's very cute. It's very like silly. This one is even sillier, maybe the silliest one on my list. I would say if the last one was for Halloween Town girls, this one is for Hocus Pocus girls. We definitely have a higher level of magic in this one and also a little bit less cozy vibes. Like, still pretty cozy, okay? It's still like a children's movie, Hocus Pocus. Like, it's not scary, but there's like a little bit more magic, a little bit more stakes in this one than in the Dead Romantics. Both great fall reads. Would recommend. Last on my list, and actually the most recent read, I finished this most recently, is The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. This book is actually the follow-up to the Soulmate Equation, but they're like interconnected standalones. If you haven't read one, that's fine. Although there are characters from the first book in this book. I love the Soulmate Equation, and I also love this one. Like, these are two of my favorite Christina Lauren books. They are delicious and delightful. I will just tell you that right off the bat. So in this book, we're following Fizzy, who is a romance author who has lost her, like, mojo. Like, she used to, like, date all the time and, like, go out and have fun and was writing, like, you know, a book a year and, like, doing excellent. And she just lost it. The past year, she, like, hasn't wanted to go on any dates, hasn't wanted to write, and has just kind of lost a little bit of her joy. And so when Connor, this British television producer with a daughter, he's a dad, recruits her for this dating show, she's like, okay, this could be a good opportunity for me to like get my mojo back. And he is normally not a reality TV producer, but he like has to do to like budget reasons. He has to produce this reality show, and he comes up with the idea of recruiting a romance author. And like all of the people that are on the dating show are like based on like romance archetypes. It's a really fun concept for a dating show, honestly. But of course, nothing goes to plan, because before the dating show even starts, Fizzy and Connor sparks fly. They like start to really fall for each other before the dating show even starts. But they're like, we cannot date each other because you are supposed to go on a dating show. It'll ruin the dating show if you were in love with the producer. And so it's about like how they make it work from there. I love this book so much. I love this book so much. It was so much fun. It was such a delight. I loved Fizzy. I loved Connor. I loved all the side characters. And this book made me think a lot about predictability and how we often think about predictability as like a bad thing. Because I would say both this book and the Soulmate Equation were like intensely predictable, and I loved it. I think oftentimes when we like talk about like predictable, it's like very much a negative, but I think in the case of these two books and a lot of romance books, honestly, predictability is not necessarily like a downside. Like I knew exactly how this book was going to work itself out. I did. I knew they were going to end up together, and I knew pretty early how they were going to make it work. There were like a few things that caught me off guard, but like for the most part, I knew what was going on. Predictability, when done well, can actually add a lot of like anticipatory delight in a book, because you know how you're like waiting along with everyone else to like see how it unfolds, even though you kind of know the directions in which it's unfolding. Is that making any sense? I like should have more eloquent thoughts on these before I come to you with this, but I want to let you know that it was a delightful romance. Maybe like I've read some really good romance this year, and this would be like towards the top of the list. Okay, that's it. This is long. I wonder how long the actual video is going to be. I will actually try to edit and post this one. If you're seeing it, I was successful. That's all I have for you folks. I will see you next time. Bye.